So I'm Ashley, and I'm going to be hosting this panel discussion on the feminist aesthetic. So I will invite my panellists to come over and I'll get them to introduce themselves. But on this panel, we have got Osaro, Phil, Martha, Sally, Sarah Jane, and Sorcha, and Jenny. Are you joining us for this? Yeah, and Jenny is joining us for this too. Yeah. We've kind of got like one each.
We have very large panels because we're trying to have multiple voices all the time.
So I guess we'll kind of start at this. Well, we've heard a lot of from Jenny already, so we'll start on this end with Phil. Here you go. Okay. And just if you could introduce yourself, a little bit about what you do, your pronouns.
Hi, I'm Phil Kingston. I'm the Community and Education Manager of the Abbey Theatre, pronouns he, him, and we create work with the community and school groups, and that's probably what I'll be talking about if we have time.
Hiya, my name's Shanahan, and I'm here in two roles. One as production manager on KSR, which was honoured to be. And also I run a theatre company up in Derry with a friend of mine, and it's called Makey Uppers, and we are serious agents. We make theatre and retell stories and restory all stories, from the patriarchy to how truths work for a whole range of audiences.
Hi, my name is Osaro. I am a performance artist I love weaving Yoruba mythology and Irish mythos into the music I make and the stories I tell with my friends. I usually infuse it through my collective, the Fried Plantains Collective. Usually I would make an alternative music night to be a mix of Irish punk bands and Nigerian and English alternative punk bands. We'd bring them all to a community centre to play for people in different venues, Abbey Theatre, the Complex, rock bars like Fibbers. Yeah, that's pretty much me. Thank you.
Is it on, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. My name is Sarah Jane Scaife, and I have a theatre company called Panellists, and we've been working with the works of Samuel Beckett I've been kind of working with him all my life. I've worked with lots of different women in lots of different countries, ethnicities, situations, and my work has kind of really looked into that part of Samuel Beckett, I suppose, but it didn't come from a political decision. It just came from an interest in the voices from the past in Ireland that haven't been heard, and the voices that I feel are there in Samuel Beckett. So it's not really a political thing, it's more an artistic interest.
I'm Martha, I'm part of the Azams, and I'm also a director, composer, and sound designer.
And I'm Jenny, I'm the director of Soul Azams, and I'm a theatre maker and facilitator.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to start off with, we've had like a lovely day of discussion about what it means to be, of the feminist aesthetics, even if you didn't realise that, and discussing what it means to create work that is, I guess, feminist in practice. But I guess I wanted to ask, and we can start with you, Phil, even, before today, how would you have defined feminist aesthetics, if you knew anything about it, and or even just what you thought of when you first heard the words?
To be honest, is that on? How's that? Okay. So for today, I think I only started thinking about feminist aesthetics when I started getting involved with solo Azams, if I'm honest, and started wondering about how that was different from the aesthetics that I ordinarily am involved with. And the differences, I won't go into it now, but the differences is to do with the fact that we exist in a patriarchy, and particularly a capitalist patriarchy. Those two things, I think, contribute hugely to the sort of aesthetics which we can operate under. I speak as somebody who works in a major arts organisation giving the lion's share of the funding. So I'm aware of the economics surrounding how work is made in this country and where the responsibilities that brings with it, and also the work that we do within that larger arts organisation is different from the main stage work. So that's affected my thoughts on feminist aesthetics.
And Jenny, I'd actually like to ask you that same question when you were going into, and Martha as well, when you're going into the process of creating Solo Sirens, were you even aware that that's what you were doing at the time, or was that just your natural practice and then as things went along you were like, oh, that's what this is?
Yeah, I think more the latter. I mean, I think that happens a lot in creative processes, doesn't it? Like you kind of have this impulse and you're not actually quite sure what you're doing until you're doing it, or maybe actually until long after you've done it. So today is fascinating for me because I'm hearing things and then going, yes, that is what I've experienced, and that is feminist. So like what you spoke about, Pamela, in terms of the embodiment of it, and how these things are really very directly experienced in the body and in the female body. The relationship between like the I and the we of art making, that relationship between what do you have to say, what is your vision, but how do you say it in collaboration with other people, and when is it a personal vision, when is it a collective vision, that kind of weaving. And this multiplicity of narratives, I think, also, and I guess that was something I had a very clear impulse about. I'd made a solo show that was very autobiographical, and I was aware as I was making it that I was like I was writing my story as much as I was unwriting my story, because in actually writing my story in my own voice, I was also unwriting previous narratives of me and what it meant to be a woman, and those had to be unwritten in order to sort of simultaneously with writing something new. And I think that's where some of this impulse of like it takes 100, and 100's not even, it's so small actually, right? It's like it's so small. It's just the very, very beginning. But yeah, Martha, what do you think?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
No, but I totally agree with everything. I think that's the impulse of those hours. Yeah.
You
The
can't
mic's
hear her?
off.
I can't hear.
I wasn't. No, that's great.
Yeah. And one thing even that kind of came to me as I was listening to everything throughout the day is that, you know, like all of us here are kind of creators in our own way. We've all like birthed something to some degree. We felt like our voices and things weren't being heard, and so we created like a collective or a theater company, and like that in itself, I was like, oh, that is the feminist aesthetic. Like that is that's what it. And it was crazy to kind of hear. So even I'd like to know, like even from you, Osaro, with the Fried Fontaine Collective, did you at the time even consider that was something that you were doing when you created it, or was it just like, did you just have a natural impulse to do so?
Yeah, I had a natural. Hello.
The mic seems to be working quite well, actually.
Okay.
This one, past this one, yeah.
Hello.
That seems to be working quite well.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. It's on.
Yeah. Okay. So, tell me, repeat the question. Just.
Oh yeah, just I guess kind of the same thing when you created the Fried Plantain collective, or when you decided to become a member of it. Were you aware that was a part of the feminist aesthetic, or was it just that you felt like your voice was being unheard and you wanted to be like a part of a community?
Yeah, it was definitely a bit of the first. I just wanted to play with my friends, basically. I wanted to go host screenings that I would love to see somewhere in Dublin. I wanted to showcase how talented my friends were when they came to poetry and writing and theatre work, because they gave me the confidence to want to, years later, actually put myself and be like them, you know, in that way, because I knew I had it in me. But at that point, when I started Fried Plantains, I was more, because I'm a very quiet person usually, so I got better at developing which I'm still learning, the skill of listening to people and seeing and observing what my friends do. So that will in later on make me be a better director when seeing, oh, these people can work better with these kind of people, because from how I see them in social settings, their personalities will clash maybe this way and their personalities will blah this way. But with Fried Plantains, yeah, I just wanted to put on the main one was the Black Jam, which was my music night, which was incorporating different artists that I love to go to, but I didn't feel maybe their voices were, or their talents were being as honored in Dublin City as other artists could be. Not in like a they're better than you or way. I feel like what I'm trying to figure out what my legacy is. Well, I just did a Hive City legacy musical with Tachi and a few other mates the last couple of weeks, and the idea of legacy is what has been in my mind ever since, of like, what do I actually want to show or leave in Dublin or in Ireland, because and I think for me these days, I'm figuring out my legacy is that I want to show people just how deadly my friends can be when it comes to the art they make, that we actually did exist once upon a time here in Dublin in 2016 or so, because our friendship might not last forever, our lives might not last forever, so recording what they do or videoing what they say, even when I'm hanging out with them in the pub, I like to just write down certain phrases or quotes they say, like, oh, what are you doing, Osaro? I just like to do that because it's just, and that's how you build story. Or if I have characters in my head, the kind of stuff my friends will say in passing, I'm like, oh, that sounds like something this kind of character would be. I'm getting off the point, but I just, there was a time when I didn't like to hear my voice, so, and it was a bit of a dissociative disorder based on past experiences, so seeing what my friends, the kind of spoken word tales they would say to each other, seeing them sing a lot brought my confidence out, so I learned to record my voice because I didn't even associate how I sounded with my body. So for years, practicing by recording the stories I say or stuff I sing got me to identify my voice with me. And I think kind of with Fried Plantains Collective or with my personal life and with friends, is that thing of like, when you see other people say the stories similar to you and they look like you, it kind of grounds me in who I am as a person, and it reduces my feeling disassociated with myself for whatever reason it may be. Fried Plantains Collective is a work in progress that me and my friends do together with making music and stuff. I'm rambling, but yeah.
There's something so beautiful that you said about how, like, this idea of creating history by going back to history, and that seems to be a linking thing if you look at the feminist aesthetic, or if you were to look at, like, say, Afrofuturism as a concept. We as people, when we tend to, or even like solo science is that exact same thing, when we feel like we're not being represented, our first instinct is to always go back to history and what we used to do. So Sorcha, I'd like to ask you, like, how has your personal history or how has your cultural history like informed the work that you do?
Thank you. In every way, that's so how Gemma and I started working together was after I left Dublin, and where I had been mentored by Jenny. That's going, I mean, she gave me work, but like, you know, kind of, I was there going, oh my goodness, she's the best thing ever. But it's going, like, you know, at the point where we met, that's the art that I was involved at, like, I was trained as an actor and I was a facilitator, badly, but that there was so much that I had no idea. I didn't know how to bring myself into my art because I didn't know me, and I didn't know how that I had anything. I never saw anything that was like, oh, that's they're doing something that connects with me. There'd been, like, I love theatre, I love performance, but there had been a huge missing gap in me as a woman from Northern Ireland who grew up at the height of the Troubles, but that's who's called Sorcha Shanahan, who, you know, she's middle class, who's like, you know, there's so many things that I was like, that I had no concept of who I was, and it was only through developing the listening skills to work with other people and to facilitate. That's how I kind of came to learn who I was in context of what hearing other people's stories and hearing other people's being released by telling their own stories, allowed me then to kind of, over the process of years and through therapy, is to get to a point where we're realizing that it's all stories. There's no thing that's not a story. It's just any kind of, like, I love hegemony, can't say it, but that term is like, going, yeah, that's just one story, and it never ever ever like applies to everyone. And like, and I think that everything today is about that, you know, kind of the fracturing of every single structure and you know, safe, like, you know, kind of like steady thing that's definitely always going to be there. It's not, because none of us are, and we're only here for a tiny fraction. And to see every single person telling their own story, finding out their own story, and having a chance to share that with other people, there's just an endless amount of stories, and every single story can be interrogated every time.
Thank you for that. And what you're saying, the idea of story and finding your voice, like, I feel like, from my own personal experience, I feel like that can only be found in places where you feel loved for and you feel cared for. And like that is the feminist aesthetic. It's this idea of like leading with love and kindness. I think we as people, even when we build communities, I feel, especially as women, we are told to socialize to get ahead, as opposed to socializing for human connection and for human just for that solidarity, just for that needs, that those voices and those brilliant stories can come out. So I'd love to ask you, Sarah, like, in what communities and what spaces did you find your own voice?
Thanks. It's funny, it's so beautiful to listen to the two of you, and particularly, sorry, what's your name? Go with the rest. Osaro, when you were talking about the love for your friends and how their talents, you just really wanted to kind of show their talents and kind of release them publicly to a certain extent or whatever. And I suppose, yeah, I don't really think of it as my story. It's like I'm listening to things here now that I'm not used to, and I think I've come from a time where we didn't have that platform. You all seem to be able to understand exactly what it is you're talking about and from, and you feel this right to speak. So I feel like I'm coming from a time in Ireland maybe where you didn't have that support system. So it's completely different. So like, I don't think of it as my voice, I always think of it as other people's. So I try and just make it simple in a way, because I know Beckett sometimes seems very kind of heavy, you know, but people say, oh, Beckett is very abstract, or Beckett is universal, and you know, it doesn't matter where you go, you know, the meaning is there, and I actually don't believe that, because at the very beginning I tried to perform universality, or I tried to direct universality, and you can't do that, you know, obviously. So I began to realize that the universal was only contained in the specific. So the more, even though the frame is very specifically there in a Beckett piece, the more specific and different everybody is, and everybody, like you're all talking about the body, and I keep thinking, why is that women's? That's just art, you know what I mean? I wouldn't necessarily think of it as just women, but I think it's the only true way to art, rather than just from a feminist perspective. But it's the specificity of, like, I find people, I mean, I have to be stopped sometimes in class because I just say, I just love all your bodies, I just love looking at you. And, you know, because everybody is so different. And if you just slow everything down and put a frame around it, every single person in the world becomes a work of art. And I suppose that's really, so I looked at the women of my mother's generation in Ireland who had really hard lives and who just didn't have a voice. And so I was looking through the prism of Beckett to look at those women. Or say, for instance, if I was working in India, the same play that was done in Ireland, done in India, would have completely different resonances, and the women would be thinking about completely different things. And but it's not just the women. Like, you know, in Malaysia there was a guy who was talking about a play called Act Without Words 2, which is basically two characters that come out of sacks at different times. One is really fast and frenetic, and the other is really slow and absent. And there's one pile of clothes on the stage, and each one of them in turn puts the clothes on and does a number of actions, and then grabs the other sack with the person in it and lifts them along the way. So it's really philosophical and really beautiful and really simple. And the guy in Malaysia said, when I asked him what was he thinking about when he was creating the piece, he said, I'm thinking that A and B, which is the two characters, are so poor. They came from like the Kuala Lumpur bus station, and they're so poor they had to share the one life. So it's like everywhere you go, meaning changes and slips and reforms, and it never stays the same. And so Martha and I did a project in Inisheer, and I suppose, and Emma is sitting over there, she's working all the time with the people in Inisheer. And it took me 30 years of going down to Inisheer and being really integrated into the community before I felt ready to make something, because I didn't want to screw up my relationship with the people and the women on the island by making art. You know, so it was, for me, and Martha, I'm sure as well, it was such a privilege to hear the women speaking about things that sometimes were quite private, which they wouldn't necessarily speak about. And again, we just took the Beckett thing. So for me, I hide behind Beckett. That's where I hide behind Beckett, you know, and let his work do what I can see is happening here, which is amazing here. But I feel like I didn't have that, so I snuck along behind a writer and used that.
Thank you. Martha, I kind of wanted to ask you said something so beautiful there about, you know, people realizing that they are art. And we've heard a lot about like women realizing that they're Kessler, that they've got stories, but like we don't realize that we are art, that our stories are poetic. So I'd love to know from you, what was it like when you were working on Solar Science, when you were creating it, like seeing these people in real time like begin to see that they are art?
Yeah, I've literally just been scrolling down notes from what everyone is saying. Like it's so interesting, and thinking about like everyone in their own individual way in this panel has talked about how they found their voice through the collective, and that's literally what we saw happening over and over again, like in individual ways, for everyone in the Solar Science Collective and for us as individuals. I suppose it's like there's not really a huge amount to say about it other than that it was incredible, and it was it's kind of the way I think about feminist aesthetics. I was just thinking about it, and I think a huge amount of it is about not just thinking about the work. It's not just thinking about the like finished product that is the art. It's thinking about the structure that is around the art, and it's thinking about making these individual moments for individual people who are part of a collective or part of a team, where they find something about themselves, find something out about themselves. And I was thinking about Lang Sana Happy Days, which was the project we did on this year, and that was that could have just been the art, like that could have just been the piece, but no, it wasn't. It was a gallery exhibition. It was all the men of the island building the mound for the female performer to ultimately perform in. It was thinking about what the end product is, but also thinking about all of the things that will be around that end, all of the community that you can build on your way to it. And I think that's what Kaiser was for me, of course, as well. It was the community building on the way, and at every point. And also to acknowledge I'm in between two mentor life and work mentors of mine. Like it's incredible. And two people who along every step of the way are thinking about no, but how does the work actually resonate with what we're doing? Like, what are we actually doing? It's not about people coming to see a show. Like, it's not about that anymore. It's about, like, what does this actually mean? Do you know? And I think, like watching Jenny at every step saying, no, this is what we're doing. Back to the ethos. This is returning to the core of the myth. That was what it was for me. I'm absolutely not answering your question, actually. I'm so sorry. But yeah, maybe something.
No, but even for me, it's really nice when I hear. I know people get really about it, but I love when people ramble because it's not about the question. It's a journey, it's a destination. Like, even if you feel like you haven't answered the question, you still said something that, like, I'm like, oh, that's really fascinating. So that's, like, I love doing stuff like this. Anyway, sorry, now I'm rambling. Phil, I kind of wanted to ask you, like, we've heard a lot today from people who, like, I imagine you, like, with your work in the Abbey, you get a lot of people who come to you with an idea that sounds like crazy. So what is it like, because it, when you create art, when we create these things, it's about building community. The end goal isn't necessarily like the final product. So I'd love to know from you, from your experience, what is it like facilitating
Gosh. Okay, so we've done a lot of projects in the 10 years that I've been there. And what tends to happen is that a project is a response to something that's happening on stage. That's a kind of a kicking off point. So I'll mention two. I'll mention one that's historic and one that's very present. We did a project called Taking Back Our Voices around Alice in Thunderland, a piece by Shanahan and this pop lady. And we decided to work with women who were involved in sex work in Ireland. It took a long time to build the trust, as you can imagine. But over several months, and by the time that had been built, the play had long gone. By the time we got to that stage, the project had to survive past the actual showing of the play. 5 female theatre makers met up with 5 women who were involved in sex work in Ireland, and they just had a relationship with them over several months and talked to them. And then in the space of 3 days, the director, Una Murphy, turned those experiences into a piece that was then shown on the Abbey stage over 2 afternoons to a very large number of people, including the head of organised crime in Ireland, somehow found a way of getting a ticket. I don't quite know how that happened, but he was there as well. What was interesting was that, and I should stress here, my involvement in this is as a manager, and often if we're doing a piece of work which feels like it needs to be specific to women's voices, I would usually absent myself from it, being a man or identifying as a man. But actually, it reminds me of something I should say here. We did a lot of work around asking for it, the dramatisation of Louise O'Neill's play about sexual consent. And in a build-up to that, we visited 7 schools around the country and we did these sexual consent workshops with many transition years, which is massively interesting to compare an all-girls school, say in Wexford, to a mixed school in Kilchimar in Mayo, and literally all the boys stood on one side of the hall and all the girls stood on the other in certain schools, and it wasn't like that in other schools, yeah? And I can tell you Glenstow Abbey was quite an interesting place to work, you know? But anyway, I remember when we were planning that, I remember saying we decided to get a group called Tender Theatre Workshop from the UK that specialised in dramatisations on abuse, because we wanted to get some training in working in this area. And they came over and we said, we're going to have 2 female facilitators. They just went, no way, don't do that. You have to have a man in the room. You have to model healthy relationships between men and women in the room, which is a learning for us. So just to finish up, I'm rambling as well, I'm laughing. Just finish up, I'll mention the latest project that we've done, just as an example of how these processes work. And I'll refer you to my colleague, Grace McKiernan over here, who's also been involved in this project. We're working with a group of women involved around a particular estate in Dublin. And first of all, and this often happens when people come to us to do a play, they go, we want to make a play about our lives and put it on the Abbey stage. And fair enough, that's the kind of impulse that first comes. And then you start to get into the process. You start to bring people come in. The facilitator for this is an actress called Imogen Doyle, who'd been in Portia Coughlin. And this group have come to see Portia Coughlin and been really affected by it, been really, really touched by it. First time they'd ever been to the theatre. and which is quite a play to see for your first play. And anyway, so Imogen was in that play, and she also wanted to learn to facilitate. So we got into a process. She facilitated. What's interesting is that we've just got through the first phase, and she's come back and said the women love doing this. They love telling stories, but what they love is the process. They don't want to act anymore. They don't want to have necessarily that pressure that something's going to be put on in a certain way, but they continue to want to play. They want to come back and continue playing. And I think that emphasizes this point about process over product. Yeah.
I guess kind of what I'd like to ask everybody, or maybe just one line from each person to finish off, is that the story of Kester. So, and not even the story of Kester, like you guys' reformed version of the story of Kester is really empowering and really nice to hear. So maybe even just like one line from everybody about like how you feel the Kester's spirit and the solo siren spirit is in you and in your work. And you can start from Jenny and go down this way.
Asking for help.
Modeling leadership.
Listening. Listening.
Being vulnerable.
A few, hello? Few words. Just thank you so much for all the talks today. I am very honored by everyone sharing themselves today. When I get writer's block or the whole artist and don't know what to make to be an artist, it's just good to go see how other people live their lives or what stories they tell. It's just really inspiring, very, very grounding. Yeah, just thank you.
Friendship.
Multiple quotations that are made in multiple voices. That really struck me.
That's it. Thank you.